All right, cool. Thank you, everyone. We have about 50 participants for tonight's sessions, and I would like to welcome the speaker for tonight, Taminder. And before we do that, I would like to invite Krishnan Srinivasan, who is the PMI Malaysia chapter's president, to do a welcoming speech to introduce Taminder. Over to you, Krishnan.
Good evening. Thank you very much for that request. I'm actually very gratified to have Tharminder join us. I met Tharminder just before MCO at the Subang Club earlier this year. Our common heritage, if you like, is that we are both Chartered Institute of Management Accountants members. So I'm actually grateful that Tharminder has very kindly offered to volunteer his time this evening and share with us his experience. I think he's going to draw on not only his management accounting experience, but also his project management experience. So I'm actually looking forward to a really good session this evening. And if I'm not wrong, it's going to be very much in keeping with the theme of the times we are living through right now. So without further ado, thank you. Over to you, Tharminder.
All right. Hi, good evening, everyone. Thank you, Krishnan, for the kind words. And hope everyone is keeping safe and well. Just let me share my screen to flash out some slides that I've prepared. Okay, so can everyone see the screen?
Yes, Taminder.
Okay,
please go ahead. Yeah.
Yep, let me just on my webcam. All right. Okay, so good evening again, everyone. And thanks for taking the time out of your busy schedule to attend this webinar. So before I start, I think the two areas that this webinar will cover is very much in tandem with what businesses both locally and globally have been going through. And basically these two areas are business resilience and project management, right? And basically during this 1 hour or so, we will try to explore how these two areas can have greater alignment and greater synergy to prepare businesses for growth even during times of uncertainty or even during a pandemic like COVID-19. Right, so if I move on. So maybe before I start, I'd just like to hear what are some of your expectations and objectives for today's session. I did prepare an agenda slide, but maybe I just want to hear some burning feelings or burning areas you would like me to cover, and then we can see how we can tailor this presentation accordingly. So any volunteers want to share any expectations? I know Krishnan mentioned some of it earlier, right? Anyone? Okay, it's fine. Let us have a look at the agenda, and then we shall see whether there's anything else that we can add on. Right. So before I officially begin, just some ground rules. So I'm not going to bore you with 10 items of the ground rules or house rules because I mean it's Thursday evening, it's been a long week at work, right? Hopefully some of you don't need to work over the weekend, right? So I've just kept it quite short, 4 ground rules, right? So number 1 is to be fully participative. So again, I would like this session to be more two-way conversation rather than one-way, because if this was conducted in a physical environment, I'm sure there'll be a lot more participation. So let's see whether we can replicate such a thing in the virtual setting. Second is like what I think Krishnan mentioned earlier, to just ensure that your mic and videos are turned off. This is just basically to ensure there's minimal background noises, right? So that we can have a more focused and concentrated discussion, right? Number 3 is basically I've set up a few polls throughout this presentation, right? So I would really appreciate it if you can contribute, because at the end of the day, we are all here to learn from each other, from each other's experiences and each other's perspectives. So it'd be good to have this kind of meaningful discussion. And last but not the least, have fun, right? We all have worked hard. Some of us during MCO have worked day and night, right? So let's try to keep this webinar a bit lighthearted, right? So if there's no further comments, so shall move on. So this is the agenda slide. So basically, we'll be covering 4 broad areas. The first one is basically to understand and appreciate the challenges brought upon by the COVID-19 pandemic. So these challenges has been well documented and well covered by the media, by consulting firms, by research houses. But I felt that it's good we just take a short refresher in order to set the scene and provide better context to the webinar today. Second is, of course, to allow business leaders such as yourselves, right, to connect project management with business continuity and business resilience. Because oftentimes these 3 components are viewed in isolation, but not many people are aware that these 3 can actually be merged or married together to allow businesses to prosper regardless of the economical or social landscape, right? Third is to basically provide a high level understanding of how business resilience and its role in the new normal, right? And last but not the least is basically to equip the participants with the concept and tools, right? So that all of us can respond proactively, not just for this COVID-19 pandemic, but any future uncertainties, any future threats of pandemic. So if there's no, or maybe just give it a few seconds. Does anyone else have anything to add to this agenda? Okay, no worries. Feel free to unmute yourself to contribute during the discussion, right? Or feel free to stop me if you need any clarifications. Right, so just a little bit about me for formality purposes, right? So my name is Tarminder. You can call me Tam for short. So basically how I would describe myself is more of a versatile strategic project manager who has the experience and exposure in managing projects, both short-term, long-term, of different natures. So when I mean different natures, I'm talking about IT projects, compliance-related projects, and even business transformation projects. So currently I'm attached as the head of strategic planning at a local private university in Selangor. And I have over 8 years of working experience across multiple business domains, but my bread and butter or expertise per se is in project management and strategy. Academically, and I think Chrisman has alluded to this earlier on, I'm a trained accountant, so I have a bachelor's in accounting and finance as well as a CIMA qualification. I recently completed my Prince 2 certificate in project management, so I'm a certified project manager. And currently I'm pursuing my MBA, specializing in strategic planning and leadership, right? And who knows in the future what other credentials I could add. And just a bit off work topic, in my spare time, basically I like to go to the gym, I like to watch football, being a Malaysian, I love great food, right? So football wise, I support Liverpool, so it's about time that we finally won a title after 30 odd years, right? So happy moments, right? Okay, so since I'm talking about project management, I volunteered myself for PMI, which is a project management body, right? I thought it's only fitting that I talk a bit about my project management experience over the last 8 years or so. And I actually had the privilege of serving both as a project manager or a project management officer, right, in various maturity levels, right? So I've experienced starting up a PMO of project management office. So in starting up a PMO is still very rudimentary. It's just to provide the senior stakeholders with an overall view of the ongoing projects that the organization is conducting, and also to drive that mindset change. So in a way, it's a component of change management, right? So how do you ensure all the staff have the so-called bare minimum requirements to successfully adopt this project management mindset? So you're looking at things like having a basic project plan, ensuring that everyone is deadline driven and outcome driven, right? Secondly, I've also had the experience of entering into a matured PMO, a project management office, right? And this was basically for a private university in healthcare and medical, right? And basically in this organization, all the tools, templates, frameworks were already in place. And thus it allowed us to rapidly deploy all these frameworks, templates across all projects. So in a way there was seamless execution, right? And last but not the least, I've also been part of the team or part of the firm that provided consultancy services to clients. So my clients used to range from diverse industries. So you're talking about FMCG, retail, insurance, shared services, and all also with diverse nature of projects, right? So you have IT, you have compliance, a bit of transformation, business transformation, and even compliance related, like implementation of an accounting standard, right? Okay, so that's a bit about me, right? So let us now kick off the actual crux of today's presentation, which is the challenges brought about by the COVID-19 pandemic. So again, most of this you all probably already know, but just as a refresher or 101, it's good to revisit some of these challenges again. Right, so COVID-19 first emerged in December last year, but it only really came to Malaysia, late February, early March due to the Tabligh cluster. And I think about 6 months ago, no one could have foreseen the extent of the COVID-19 impact, not just to society, but to businesses as well, right? So when our Prime Minister announced the movement control order in early March, it caught all businesses off guard, right? And this resulted in tremendous business impact across all industries, right? So the first impact was the decline in sales, right? Consumers or customers could no longer go to their favorite restaurants to enjoy their teh tarik or roti canai, right? We couldn't go shopping, we couldn't go to the gym, right? And all this resulted in a decline in revenue for companies, right? And thus leads to the second point, which is liquidity and cash flow challenges. So while I think everyone is aware of the phrase, cash is king, but I think this COVID-19 pandemic really brought this phrase to life, right? Especially for small, medium enterprises, they were struggling to pay their debt obligations, they're struggling to pay their employees, right? And, if it wasn't for the, Penjana package, the stimulus packages, right? I think the impact would have been far greater, right? It also affected the workforce disruption. So it was two facets basically. One is more from a working from home arrangement. So the impact to this for management or business leaders is now how do we start managing our employees, our subordinates, because you can't see them physically in front of you, right? So basically then you have to have that element of trust and being outcome driven so that your employees still deliver. And for the second facet, which is more of the less fortunate or the more impacted industries like travel, like hotels, right? They were forced to lay off workers, right? Or even pay cuts, right? So this brought about huge workforce disruption and also increased the unemployment rate. And lastly, but definitely not the least, is supply chain management. During the MCO, there was the interstate travel ban. So what happened for companies, especially like in manufacturing, right? When they have multi-vendors and you have some vendors overseas, some vendors in other states in Malaysia, how are they going to supply you the raw materials to do your manufacturing of your products, right? So it brought about a lot of impact, right? And businesses were quickly forced to adapt to this new normal, or rather to these challenges. This brings me to the next slide, right? So how did businesses respond? So first, I think all businesses formed some sort of crisis committee, and I was fortunate enough to be part of this crisis committee for my current organization, right? And basically, crisis committees usually consist of senior business leaders. They're looking at your C-suite, your CEOs, CFOs of this world. And basically, the idea is, these business leaders who are highly experienced would then be able to address the multitude of challenges that the COVID-19 brought about to their businesses, right? Next was, of course, laser focus on preservation of cash flow, right? So it's no longer about business growth. I think 2020 is no longer about business growth. It's more about business survival, right? So companies had to quickly relook into their P&L, their profit and loss, to see what cost items they could potentially delay to next year or even eliminate. And the end goal of this was basically to ensure that there's, as bare minimum cost as possible, right, in order to keep the company alive. At the same time, businesses had to quickly migrate to online. Now, while most businesses have some form of online presence, right? But what about more traditional businesses? So more traditional ones, meaning like hotels, like gyms, like cinemas, for example, right? Yes, you can buy their packages or their items online, but you can't, enjoy the experience. So if you're talking about gyms, for example, you could no longer go to the physical gym, right? So what a lot of these businesses did, right? They started offering like online classes, online gym classes. If you look at F&B, they started to, quickly go on Grab, on Food Panda, right, to ensure that at least some form of revenue comes in during these past few months, right? And even for, I think recently I came across an article of a spectacles company in Malaysia. They basically implemented technology so that customers can view the type of frames of their spectacles using their mobile phones. So that means that you no longer need to visit the shop unless you need to test your eye power. But for those who wear spectacles for cosmetic purposes, right, they don't really need to visit the physical store, right? And lastly is businesses responded by recalibrating their annual business plan. I think it's safe to say that any business plan that was approved by the board late last year for 2020 has been ripped to shreds, right? Any growth agenda, any scaling up of businesses, right? It ain't going to happen in 2020. So instead, a lot of businesses started go on survival mode, looking at where can we cut costs, where we can quickly, recoup some of our revenue, any revenues that's locked as still owed by their customers, quickly start chasing that so that your cash flow position is sustainable, right? So this is some of the responses of businesses. There may be more, right? And basically by doing all this together with the assistance by the government, a lot of the businesses still manage to survive up to today, right? So maybe before I move to the next slide, I would just like to hear maybe from one or two of you, right? In your opinion, how do you think businesses can become more resilient for future, maybe not pandemics, but future threats, future uncertainties? Any volunteers? Because I thought this would be a good question to have, because it leads to my next slide, which is rather interesting. So I thought before that, maybe I could just hear some of your feedback.
Hi, this is Yi Ing from Singapore.
Hi.
Hi, I just thought, how can businesses be more resilient to face future pandemic? I think agility here is very, very important. And I feel, I don't have deep knowledge in terms of project management, and I wonder if there is a hybrid between agility and project management to actually help businesses to be more resilient. I mean, while as much as we want to plan, we also want to leave room for flexibility. So that's my thought.
Yep, and it's an excellent point. So in project management, there is the concept of agile project management, which basically looks at quickly getting a product out in the market and then having that iterative process to improve it. And usually it goes by sprints and so on. I won't go into the technicalities of it, right, for in view of time. But yes, agility I think is the key. And to extend further from that, right, or expand that topic rather, I think agility should be part of the culture of the organization. So while a lot of organizations will have your annual business plans, but I think if businesses have that concept of agility built in, right, then they don't need to be so rigid with whatever that's outlined in their business plan. Like I take for example the recent Penjana package, right? That has brought actually a lot of revenue to higher education institutions, to training providers in running short courses, right? Because of the grants given via the Penjana package. So this is an example, a very recent example of how businesses can capitalize on an opportunity even in the face of a pandemic. or even in the face of a very volatile environment. It's a good point. Anybody else?
Yeah, Taminder, there are also a few comments in the chat box by Boon Yu. You're talking about cost efficiency is also important. And Alan has a question about what about going lean?
What about going lean?
Yes.
Yes, so that's a good point. And I think it goes back to my earlier slide on workforce disruption. So if you talk about lean, maybe from a HR perspective or manpower planning perspective, is to maybe start having an organizational structure that's more project team based. So, who knows that in the future you might have a situation where employment is no longer on fixed term contracts or permanent employment, but maybe it's more on an assignment basis. So, you join the company, complete the project or complete the assignment, 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, right? And then if the company still has projects in the pipeline that can utilize your skill sets, then you continue. If not, you start looking elsewhere. So it's building upon the gig economy as well, but I think it builds onto the point of the person who raised this question on lean, being lean. So meaning keeping your cost structure as efficient as possible while maintaining the quality of standards that the customers expect. Excellent comment. Okay, so I think I shall move on to the next slide. Okay, so the earlier parts basically talked about the challenges, talked about how businesses responded. Now we talk a bit about new or enhanced business models that resulted from this past few months, right? So let's start with your consulting firms, your accounting firms, your BCGs, KPMGs of this world. When COVID-19 hit, they could no longer go to clients to pitch their expertise. And bear in mind, a lot of these consulting firms, they have built their reputation based on their knowledge management or content management, right? They're usually viewed as experts in certain fields, right? So what they started to do was they started to share their technical and domain expertise via webinars for free, and I even attended a webinar from KPMG which talked about the impact towards higher education institutions, right? And a lot of the points that was raised by the speakers there, right? Actually, you would have had to pay KPMG to be engaged in a project in order to extract some of those points, right? So to me, it was unheard of for these accounting firms or consulting firms to give away their knowledge for free, not just for the broader agenda of helping businesses to rebuild, but also to kind of adapt their business model to the current environment, right? So that's on accounting firms, right? To universities, so when MCO hit, there's interstate travel was not allowed, international travel, meaning international students also weren't allowed to come here, right? So how then did universities respond towards attracting new students, towards student recruitment, student enrollment? So they started to host virtual open days, right? They started to host e-counseling sessions. So instead of going to the university to inquire about the courses, right, they could easily do it through this kind of webinar or Zoom facility or even any other platform. Universities also had to migrate all their contents to a learning management system. Now, in some rural areas, they used the most rudimentary learning management system, which was WhatsApp. So that's not really encouraged, but basically the point was that they quickly then became an online university, right? So from a traditional university, they had to become an online university, right? And lastly, they also conducted webinars, not just on showcasing their expertise. So meaning like if Sunway is not just to showcase that they are very good in accounting programs, but they also did some engagement for staff and students, even from a mental well-being perspective, right? And then the last one, I think, is the rise of a new industry that we will see in the coming months and even maybe going into 2021 is cloud kitchen, right? So basically the context or the background of this is, with F&B establishments forced to be shut down, right? Some business owners decided to just close shop and started to, do food delivery businesses, right? Or some, individuals started to even operate food delivery businesses from their house, right? But with the limitation that they face, especially if you are cooking food for the masses from your home or from your apartment is that you don't have that scale, you know. You may not even have a complete kitchen to begin with, right? And in order to buy all those kitchen equipments, it's going to cost you a lot of money, right? So this is where Cloud Kitchen solves that business problem, right? It's similar to a co-working space where basically is each so-called establishment can have a shared space or shared kitchen. So you will have access to all the cooking ware, your microwaves, your ovens, your toasters, whatever you name it, your pots and pans, right? And at a more cost-effective price, right? And some F&Bs are already using this. So Da Makan, I think it's quite well known, right? Epic Food Hall, which is located in Bandar Sunway, and Mayong Dong Tteokbokki. These are some of the early movers, right? And I'm quite confident that this is something that will gain prominence in the coming months. Because let's face it, like even overnight sensations like Sugu Pavitra, right, have their limitations, right? They only have certain square feet to work on from their homes, right? So this is where Cloud Kitchen solves this problem. Okay, so before I begin the next part, is there any questions about COVID-19 challenges or maybe any feedback you have with regards to new business models?
Yes, Taminder. So
Yeah.
there's one question from Rajakumar. His question sounds like this. Many planned projects got delayed before of pandemic impacts. How do you suggest projects-based companies overcome this issue?
Sorry, could you repeat the first part?
Yep, okay. Many planned projects got delayed before of pandemic impacts.
Okay.
How do you suggest projects-based companies overcome this issue?
So meaning is to how to reignite these stalled projects, right?
Yep, correct. Or no, basically it's like what's the suggestions actually for all these project-based companies to overcome the issue that caused by these pandemic impacts?
I see. Okay. So I think this is where will depend on the nature of the project to begin with, right? I think if you're talking about construction engineering projects, that's a bit tougher. But if you're talking about IT deployment projects or business transformation projects, I feel this is where we can utilize technology to still run the projects remotely, right? So I think the question is coming more from a how do we manage the projects, right?
I would like to think so. Yes.
Yeah.
Let's
Yeah.
focus on that one. Yeah. But
Okay. Yeah. So this is where like we should use technology in terms of like certain free project plan softwares out there, right? ClickUp, I think, is one. You can have a shared project. Sorry, you can have a project team that shares the same app, right? And you can monitor the project plan from there. You can raise issues from there, right? The other part I think is to re-look into the business case. So if you touch on the point on how to kickstart certain stall projects, I think we need to go back to the basics. And the basics, when I say the basics, I mean the business case, right? So is there a real clear ROI, right? I think if there's a clear ROI, especially if it contributes to the bottom line of the organization, I think most, board members or most C-level individuals would agree to kickstart this project, assuming that there's no huge capex involved.
good. Thank you, Taminder. There's another question, but I would suggest probably you take the questions at the end of the session, simply because it's quite long, and then I could share my screen for the list of questions later.
Okay, Ken.
All right. Yeah.
I think,
Please proceed.
Yeah. Before I move on, let me just I have a couple of polls that were prepared as kind of like a refresher or to just make sure that any of you have paid any attention. So let me launch the first poll. Right. Yeah. So maybe I'll just give it about a minute. So I would like to hear, based on your company, right, what was the main challenge faced by your company, right? Is it cash flow? Is it staffing? Is it the unable to migrate towards online? Let's just give it about a minute. Quite interesting. Okay, so 34 of you have completed it. Okay, 1 minute is up. Maybe I just end the poll. Okay, so thank you for those who voted, right? So from here we can see that, okay, not surprisingly, almost half have voted for cash flow. So yes, cash flow was a huge challenge, right? But I'm actually more interested to hear about the others. You know, there's a show of individuals who voted for others. Maybe one of or two of you could voice out as to what were the specific challenge faced by your company.
Yes, you can go unmute yourself and answer this question if you're one of the 12. Even if you're not one of the 12, you can still put in your thoughts.
Hi, Dharminder. This is Ganesan. I think that was my long question earlier, which kind of reflects the same point. When I said other, what I was implying towards was basically, obviously, bottom line, it goes back to CAPEX and OPEX.
Yep.
But the priority of CAPEX, OPEX related to the original business model or business case, due to this C-19, COVID-19 situation, the owner/C levels are not able to, I guess, adapt to the change. Now, this is top down.
Yep.
So the change costs model are resisted because they're unsure. Even though the underlying project management concepts may be lean or even, well, even the traditional waterfall, it's being resisted. That's what I've seen, to answer your question on the poll.
I see. So,
Apologize if it's diverted, but you know that was what I've seen.
okay, I mean, valid point. So it's more towards the resistance from the top, right?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, interesting perspective. Thanks for sharing. Anyone else? Okay, if not, I mean, you all can contribute even at the later part of this presentation. Right. So just one more poll before we move on to the next one. Okay, so this touches on the new business model. So do you think that, you know, there will be an abundance of blue ocean businesses that will spring about in the next 6 to 12 months? Or do you think that, you know, once, you know, any pharmaceutical companies finds a vaccine, you know, we'll go back to the old ways of doing things, you know? So just like to hear your sentiments. Okay, let's just give it another 20 seconds. Can we find a few seconds more? This is interesting. Some people still think that there won't be that many blue ocean businesses. Okay. Okay, I think in interest of time, we'll end this poll. Okay. Yeah. So it's interesting to see that, you know, 10 out of the 40 of people who voted think that there will be no blue ocean businesses in the next 6 to 12 months. But I think only way, I think not many people can predict the future. So I think time will tell. Okay, so thank you everyone who voted. So we can now move on to the second part, which is business resilience and how different it is to BCP, which is business continuity planning. So I've prepared or rather extracted this video, which actually gives a good flavor of the differences between business resilience. All right, so let's just play this.
I think the first thing is to distinguish between what's an accident and a crisis. For him, an accident is something we know what's going to happen, and we know it happens once in a while. We know what to do when it does happen, and we're kind of ready for it.
Sorry, could everyone hear the video just now?
Yes.
Good, okay. Okay, just checking.
For it, even if it's, you know, tremendously tragic, like an airplane crash or something. A crisis is different in that we really don't know what's happening. We don't know what's going to happen, and we're not really sure what we should do. and there's really very little roadmap to guide our steps forward. Challenge really is, how do we keep our people safe with imperfect information? But how do we do so in a way which doesn't shut down the world? Because if the right answer to keep people safe is to send everybody home, and if every business leader sends everybody home, we will create an economic calamity which is far worse than the virus could ever be. That's really the kind of conundrum of this whole thing. To come up with new ideas which can help you as a business leader achieve the mission of the institution or the organization you work for. Keep people safe, but keep the lights on. And specifically, you know, it's really about maintaining a certain degree of cash flow to avoid calamity. Now, in that context of all that, there's clearly a supply chain issue, which is where are the stuff we use for our products and services coming from? You will have supply chain interruptions. How long they'll be is something to actually dig into, and drilling into your supply chain, understanding where your risks are at your suppliers, at their suppliers, and all the way down to raw materials. Schneider Electric, they have 2 sources of supply for everything they buy. A big factory in China and a little one somewhere else. So they're ready for a disruption coming from China, even though they were not planning on a coronavirus, but they are resilient enough to withstand it. I think this is sensible. Taking steps to protect frontline workers. If that means giving them masks, does that mean putting small plexiglass barriers, putting in a hotline with someone who knows what they're doing to ask, 3 or 4 questions? Are the frontline people safe? If someone gets sick on the front line, will they call in sick, or do they not get paid if they get sick? In which case, maybe you need to relax your sick leave policy so people who are ill can feel they don't have to come to work. And to me, these are the kinds of things that companies can come up with in the middle of this situation. It's about flexibility, adaptability, creative thinking, and moving quickly. Getting ready for the next situation, it's about scenario planning and really building resilience into the fundamental business model, which might mean going away from this hyper lean, hyper efficient model that we've had in our head for the last 20 years. Preparedness, or even resilience, is about building into the organization and into its systems and processes and decisions enough strength to withstand stuff that we know is going to happen sooner or later. World Health Organization ran, the guys who know about this stuff have been expecting one of these for a while. Business leaders typically don't think about the unexpected. And I think that is something that has to happen from very senior management or even the board to say, we are worried about these risks, please mitigate them in your daily work, which is different than saying we are worried about making the maximum amount of money for the best return for our shareholders. As business leaders think about the future, they normally only think about everything being fine. Being fine in the sense it might be more or less economic growth. There might be, maybe one party or another would win the election, but fundamentally, business as usual is the only future that we consider. In real life, things happen. There are problems between countries. There are problems within countries, civil wars, economic sanctions against one country because someone doesn't like what they're doing. So this virus, I think, is a perfect example of kind of the expected unexpected. This is probably not the last virus we're going to see in our lifetimes or our professional careers. So one of the issues is, what can we learn from this crisis for the next time?
Yeah. So the video highlights a few key words, right, that was brought about by the speaker. So he talked about lights on. He talked about risk management. Talked about also flexibility, having the adaptability. And more importantly, he used the word expected, unexpected. So most of us, I think, as business professionals, we go about our work thinking about, okay, this year we'll grow our revenue by X percentage, or we shall try to minimize the loss by X percentage. But no one really predicts about this kind of unexpectedness, right? So which is really what business resilience is about. So this table on the right basically shows some of the differences between business resilience and business continuity planning. So for resilience, we are talking about responding to disruptions in the business while striving for growth, meaning ensuring that the company is still moving the needle for growth. Whereas business continuity planning is more about responding to incidents, right, in order to continue business operations, meaning keeping the lights on, right? Second part is more from a culture perspective. So business resilience is about building it in the culture of the organization, right? So like the speaker mentioned, risk management. So risk management usually can be embedded in the culture of the organization, right? And business continuity basically is a plan that's created and executed in isolation, right? So there's no culture element in here. It's just like a solid plan that, let's say, in the event of, I don't know, fire, for example, right, to ensure that all your data is protected and etc., right? And finally, business resilience is spearheaded by senior management. So similar to the crisis committee of COVID-19 for all businesses, it was traditionally spearheaded by senior management. But business continuity is more part of a dedicated team that usually sits in the risk management department or sometimes even internal audit department. So this is some of the differences, right? Sorry. Right. And the next slide basically is adapted from Coca-Cola, right? So they have a business resilience framework, which basically touches on the same elements that was shown in the previous slide. So you're talking about protecting the business, you're talking about growth, and more importantly, you're talking about how can businesses enhance its capabilities to respond to change and crisis. So the framework basically shows how business resilience cuts across multiple verticals, right? So you're talking about risk management, your enterprise risk management. You're talking about security and fraud control, which is more towards IT related. Insurance usually is for your like officers, your PPEs and so on, right? Crisis management and business continuity, which is a subset of business resilience. And basically all of this is to do, or the main purpose is to support growth and protect the business during times of uncertainty, right? And the bottom pillar or the bottom categories basically talks about how do businesses strategize during times of uncertainty? How can we standardize, processes, policies, SOPs, and so on to ensure that we keep things simple, so that when in the event of a crisis or in the event of another pandemic, right, employees know what to do. There's no many layers of bureaucracy and so on. Right. So if there's no further questions, we'll move on to the next part, which is project management, right? Of how we can adopt and utilize project management to respond to COVID-19. Right. So just an overview of project management. I know that I'm probably talking to majority of project managers and some of us are certified, but just for the benefit of everyone, just a refresher of this, right? Project management are usually temporary in nature and they have a specific start and end date. They usually have a specific set of objectives or project goals, right? With the project structure, meaning your governance structure, right? They also have resources, which are usually dedicated resources assigned to the project. And these are usually cross-functional resources. So some from finance, some from HR, some from procurement, right? And the goal is basically to come up with the durable or the product that has the business benefit. So business benefit is basically like your ROI, right? Return on investment. Why should the CFO, for example, approve this project? He or she will only approve if you can show there's clear profitability to this project, right? And then each project is unique in its own ways, right? Okay, so this slide basically is where I would like to spend some time on, right? On building the case for project management, on how we can use this towards the business resiliency of the organization, right? And usually for project management, I would say project managers are critical to execute this 7-step plan, right? So the first is stakeholders. So we all know project management is about stakeholder management, looking after their needs, their wants, their desires, right? And same with COVID-19, right? It was all about, protecting your people, ensuring their safety, ensuring that their well-being was taken care of, right? And this does not only this is not only limited towards your people, but also maybe to your customers, to your suppliers, right? Second part is the risk management element, right? So risk management is a core dimension of project management, where basically project managers are really used to, going through the rigor of identifying the risk owner, the formulating the risk response plan. So this basically is a huge and significant component for any future uncertainties or future threats, right? Because you are able to clearly identify the risk and quickly execute any risk response plan. The third step is basically doing the stock take, right? So project managers are, I would say, well versed with prioritization. They know how to prioritize a project based on criticality and impact, right? So whether it's for COVID-19 or for any future crisis, project managers acting as business leaders, basically, right, can re-look into the laundry list of projects, re-look at some of the business cases and reclassify the priority levels, and more importantly, redeploy resources to the high need areas. So when we talk about resources, you're not only talking about manpower, we're also talking about financial resources, right? Item 4 is basically project managers as strategists. So this is where I think to non-project managers, some of them view project managers as just administrators, right, or very operational in nature. But what they don't know is that project managers are very powerful because they have an entire view of their company operations. Especially if you have stayed in a company long enough, you probably have worked on multiple projects across multiple vendors, multiple departments, and even sometimes multiple vendors. So you're able to better link the respective projects to the wider internal business environment. So I feel this is quite powerful on how project managers can reinvent themselves. Number 5 is more on procurement management, right? So in order to build business resiliency, like what the speaker talked about in the video earlier on, right? He talked about how the company had 2 sources of vendors, right? Meaning if there's a crisis in country A, they can quickly switch over to the vendor in country B, right? So this is where there's opportunity to relook at some of the supply chain management, right? Item 6 is on communication, right? So project managers, because we have to communicate to all levels of management, including working level, we will have to tailor our communication styles, right? You can't, to the C level or to the steering committee, they are more important with the numbers and the ROI, right? But to the working level, they are maybe more task oriented, how to minimize the number of steps towards doing a certain, work stream plan, for example, right? So this is where project managers are able to communicate any scenarios that arise from the scenario planning and communicate this in a more impactful manner, right? And last but not the least is lessons learned, right? On how project managers can basically institutionalize some of these review cycles, document these lessons learned, and then basically refine it for future cycles, right? So I think these 7 steps basically summarizes how project management can be aligned towards business resiliency. Because we know the end goal of business resilience is ensuring that still some form of business growth in times of uncertainty, right? And this slide basically shows the 7 steps that leads towards the end goal. Okay, so next I'll play a short video of basically the importance of agility in business resilience. So this is something one of the participants touched upon earlier on the topic of agility. So basically, to summarize the video, right, they talked about cloud computing and how it can be agile and simplifying processes along the way, right? But more importantly, towards the end of the video, you would have read that, you know, business resiliency should be something that's planned for, right? That should be embedded into the overall culture of the organization, right? So maybe it's about time that, you know, most businesses start adopting a business resilience mindset rather than just business continuity. Right. Oops. Okay. So next, this is just a high-level summary of or concept of some of the deliverables of project management. Again, this may be familiar to most of you, right? But I'll just touch upon some of the key ones, especially if your organization is looking to kickstart a project management office, right? So broadly, there's 5 phases. So on the initiate stage, the critical deliverable or tool commonly used are like business case, you know, ensuring there's a strong ROI, right? A project charter that basically lists down what the project is all about, right? And a governance structure. For the planning stage, of course, the project plan is critical, coming up with the budget, the scope, and how you're going to approach it, right? And then executing is basically about ensuring that the processes and standards are deployed accordingly. Then you monitor and control via your weekly or monthly status reports, whether it's to the working committee or the steering committee, right? And lastly is closure of the project, right? Documenting the lessons learned, and more importantly, when you close the project, ensuring there's a smooth handover to the business unit, right? So these are some of the basic tools and templates commonly used. Okay, now we come towards the end of the presentation, but before we end, basically the take-home message is, you know, if your organization doesn't have a project management office, I would highly encourage you to be that champion to start the PMO immediately or next Monday, right? And if you already have a project management office, right, that is basically trying to up the game, up the ante, right? Really look at where your PMO is in terms of maturity level and how you can move up the maturity chain, right? On the left, basically, is some high-level steps or high-level concept based on my personal experience on how you start a PMO. So for the benefit of everyone, maybe I just quickly go through it. I think the first step is basically defining the difference between a project and a business as usual operation, right? So a common challenge that I faced, right, when starting up the PMO was, you know, senior stakeholders think that anything that moves is a project, but in reality that may not be, right? If you're doing a research work, for example, right, that's not really a project, right? Whereas if you're doing an ERP implementation, that is a project, right? So it's defining this difference and getting the buy-in from the senior stakeholders, right? Then you got to start looking at your staffing, you know, forming the core of the PMO team, right? So maybe you'll have a project director, project manager, and 1 or 2 project support officers or project management officers that will basically be the drivers of change to ensure that the PMO culture is embedded in the organization, right? Then you got to start prioritizing the project list. And trust me, this is where, especially if you're starting up a PMO, is going to be the most challenging, because everyone will say that their projects is high criticality, high importance, right? But then this is where you got to really look into the project. What's the scope, especially of the project? Is there any external regulatory requirements? Meaning, for example, if your timeline is delayed, is it going to result in any external financial penalty or legal risk, right? If not, if it's an internal timeline, and especially if it's not a mandate given by the board, maybe you can reprioritize it depending on your resources, right? Next is basically using the processes, tools, and templates, some of which was shown in the earlier slide, right? And basically building upon it. So to me, it's like when you start off a PMO, the bare minimum that the organization should practice is having a project plan, having an issue log, a risk log, and a decision log, right? And then once you get that rigor going, then you can expand the tools and templates, start to bring in your communication log, start to bring in your change log and your manpower planning log, and so on, right? And then last but not the least is continuous improvement, right? And this ties back with how we can move up the maturity chain, right, and basically become a robust PMO unit in the organization, right? And this will not only help companies to navigate the residual challenges of COVID-19, right, but it will also help organizations to mitigate any risks of future uncertainties. So let's not talk about pandemic. We can even talk about epidemics, right? If you look at organized NGOs like Mercy Malaysia, right? When they go to the affected countries for medical relief emergencies, right? There's strong elements of project management being applied there. You have a dedicated team. They have that daily catch up or daily updates to ensure any risk is mitigated, right? And more importantly, they have very comprehensive set of documentation, right, to measure whether their project or their relief effort is successful or not, right? So before I conclude the presentation, let me just flash out again a couple of polls.
Hi, Taminder. I think we only have enough time for one of the poll before we go into the Q&A sessions.
Okay. So
Yep.
one poll then.
Yep.
Okay. Yep. So do you think, after especially the end of this presentation, do you think that the PMO directly contributes towards the business resiliency agenda of the company? Okay, let's give it another few more seconds, another maybe 20 seconds.
Yep.
Okay, maybe another 10 seconds. So 48 of us have voted. Let's see if we can squeeze in one or two more. Okay, so I shall end the poll. Yep. So, I mean, I think it's not surprising that vast majority of us, 84%, voted that the project management office does contribute towards business resiliency. I'm glad to hear that, because then it also shows that the field or the discipline of project management, right, is actually gaining prominence of importance in businesses across Malaysia. Right. Okay. Yep. So that brings me to the end of the presentation. I'm happy to answer some of the questions in the chat box.
Yep. So Taminder, I will flash my screen so that you can actually look at the questions.
Okay.
All right. Let me know if you can see my screens, Taminder.
Yeah, I can.
I think the first question has taken, and then the second question by Ganison, I think you probably answered some of the questions just now, but if you want to take it on again before we move to Jason's questions, oh sorry, To.
Business owners are focused. Yeah, I think this is what Mr. Ganeshan touched on earlier.
Correct.
Brought up earlier, right? So it's very much to do with resistance from the top, and I think the best approach is just basically continuously lobbying for them to change their mind. So how we continuously lobby is, of course, the looking at the business case, the ROI, maybe looking at the implication if the project is not executed, right? So these are maybe some angles that you can consider.
Good. Let's move on to the next question by To. JS To.
Yeah, so I think for the construction industry, I think it's quite badly affected, similar with airlines and hotels, right? But this is where I think that just need to be creative, like hotels, for example. It may not be directly relevant to the construction projects, but using similar analogy, right? Some hotels, hotels, they are experts in, for example, housekeeping. They have very good housekeepers who are professionally trained to make the beds of the clientele that visit there, right? So what some hotels have done or are thinking to do is outsource their service so that the same housekeepers go to the customer's home to make their beds. So at first glance, of course, it's, how is this relevant to the construction industry? It's not, right? But the point I'm trying to make is that, hotels are slowly trying to change their mindset from purely being a so-called habitat or for lack of a better word, a shelter for tourists, right, to becoming a service provider, right, of how we can provision some of our housekeeping services, maybe even some of cooking. Maybe they might even outsource a chef to your home, right? So maybe this some of the creative things that the industry would consider. And the last question, any of the project risk and yeah, I don't think eliminate is the right word. Maybe it's more of minimize. So I agree that if we have a product mindset or product focused mindset, right, we can mitigate or minimize some of the project risk, right? But I think there are risks that, not product related. So you're talking about staffing, what happens if, let's say you are now developing a app, an IT app, and one of your best developers suddenly leave, right? And he or she is the only person who has the expertise in that programming language, right? Then how can you address those kind of things? So even though you have a product mindset focus, right? But, these kind of challenges will be hard to eliminate altogether. I think there's more questions in the chat box, right?
I can't say so because, hold on, yeah.
Hi, sorry. Can I ask a question directly here?
Yep,
Yes.
sure.
Hi, my name is Sao Fong. I actually joined this talk because I'm so happen that I'm also doing a research with the same title, but I'm looking
Okay.
at it from agile project management approach. Just now, from your 1 hour talk, I'm not sure whether I get it right. I think we are still surrounding project-based operations. The resilience from the project-based management, as well as a team of PMO, running the show, taking the lead in helping the business resilient. But I was thinking, how could this project management skill or knowledge be applied to not just C-level, not just PMO, but smaller companies like anyone, entrepreneur, the bosses, or any manager, in their respective sections? Instead of like I'm implementing an ERP, I'm literally running a project. But what if I'm doing something? I think just like you mentioned, business as usual versus the project. I didn't quite get your highlight on that part. Are you saying that what you're trying to highlight here is the application of project management approach on projects, but not on those business as usual operations? Or can all these project management approaches or skills or leadership can apply across all levels on different operations?
Yeah, so I think first, maybe I address the part of business as usual and project management. So usually, project management is applied only to unique projects, right? So maybe an example of business as usual activities are, if you talk from a finance perspective, maybe it's bank reconciliation. That's a business as usual activity. Paying your suppliers, that's a business as usual activities, right? So those kind of activities, you don't really adopt a project management mindset or approach, right? But if let's say you are I think you touched upon just now, deploying a IT system, right? That's where then you need to have proper planning. Proper planning, documenting what's the scope, what modules you're going to implement, right? What's the cost, what's the timeline, right? Ensuring that your business requirements are catered for, right? So those are the elements where project management comes in handy, right? The part of, I think, sorry, maybe you could repeat that if I got it. Sorry, maybe you can correct me if I got it wrongly. You mentioned about how can business owners utilize project management, is it?
Yes, yes.
Yeah. So maybe I give you a personal example, a personal experience. A friend of mine who recently started off a food catering business, right? So from the time that she planned to executed the business, or rather started out the business, was very short, because in her mind, while she may not have had a formal project plan, meaning a formal Excel template or what, right? But she could quickly identify what are the activities need to be done, from registering the business to coming up with the collaterals, right? Coming up with the design of the brochures, right? How to source for customers, right? What's the minimum customers orders they need a day to sustain or to break even, right? So that goes towards the financial management aspect of the business, right? Also, how do I make my brand more visible? So that's leveraging of social media. So having a very basic or rudimentary digital marketing plan, right? So what I'm trying to allude at is basically that even though the person didn't have formal project management training or project management experience, but this person used the core principles of project management to quickly launch the business as a business owner. So I'm not sure whether that addressed your question.
Yes, yes. I do agree. That's why I said, that's why I actually believe project management
Mm.
skill, or what's the right word for that, should be, I mean, can be applied at a more widened scope instead of just limited to just, you know, on certain projects now. That's what I
Yeah.
believe.
Yeah, I mean, it can be applied to our personal life also, right? So if you, for example, if your goal is to keep healthy, you can come up with a project plan. Your work streams will look like, physical activity, diet, and so on. So yeah, it can be applied in many areas.
But thing is that I actually find that many people, I mean, especially business owner, they still cannot get the idea of like how a PMO, how a project manager actually run a project. To them, it's like, okay, today I want to launch something,
Hmm.
a new business or whatever, or marketing. So they do not have the concept of like managing different area like risk management,
Hmm.
stakeholder management. Maybe they know somehow, on certain areas, certain things they need to take care of, but they do not know the whole concept of it. Like what's the proper way to go about.
Yeah.
So I think there is a gap between, those people out there who did not attend a proper project management training.
Yeah, true. True. I mean, but I think for those type of individuals, as they start scaling up their businesses, that's when they'll start to appreciate the importance of project managers.
Okay, thank you for your sharing.
Thank you for your question.
All right, Taminder. So I saw there are a couple of questions down there, but in the interest of time, I think we are running out. So if you could take one more, based on the question that we have here in the chat window, I believe you can see if you can take one of it. Yeah, who's the lucky guy? Definitely not the Ayam Bakar.
The ayam bakar. I think we're getting ready for supper, that one.
Yeah. There is Eugene. Yeah. That more towards a question statement.
Yeah, Eugene. Yep.
Yeah.
More to the statement.
All right. If that's the case, yeah, no problem. before we end the sessions, I would like to, how to say, on behalf of, hold on. Oh, it's actually it takes some time to load. Can you guys see my screen? Yes, I hope so. Yes. All right. So on behalf of the project management PMI Malaysia chapter, I would like to welcome Krishnan to hand over this certificate of recognitions. I know it's a virtual, but we still need to do it. For Krishnan to hand over this mementos to Tharminder. Krishnan, are you there?
Thank you, Tharminder. Thank you, MC. Sorry, I didn't get your name.
It's okay.
I don't feel like it's so virtual, Tharminder. I hope you feel the same. At least we've met each other earlier this year. I think most of us have benefited from your sharing today. So thank you very much for that. And perhaps you'd consider joining the chapter. That's one ask of you. And maybe there will be opportunities for you to actually do some further sharing as you have done this evening with our community. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Tharminder, on behalf. Okay, there's one more slide, which is actually the Survey Monkey. Oh, hold on. Okay, although the survey will be sent out, but just in case, yep, if you can do it. And if no other questions from anyone, I would like to express thank you very much to everyone, and for those Muslim colleagues and also participants who will be celebrating the Hari Raya Haji tomorrow. Selamat Hari Raya Haji, and stay safe. Thank you, everyone. See you again in the next month sessions. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Cheers.
Cheers. Bye.